News summary. I want to do one little quick wrap up from the last things we were talking about before we get into something else. Is everything all right? If you recall, one of the last things we were talking about had to do with how ordinary psychological, that is, city thought, but I was attributing it to the wonderful academic world and clinical world of psychology, but how they see what is referred to as persuasion, how they see it operating on the basis of one person being apparently persuaded to think, act, feel differently, believe differently. And the persuasion seems to be, in their opinion, which I was using as a springboard, in one of three ways: either through fear, through promise of some sort of help and assistance, some reward in the future, or through just ordinary group peer pressure, combined with another contemporary feeling, supposedly by the world of psychology, that men's actions, once it gets down to it, seldom match what they actually think, what they say they think. So you recall that's where we were last running when we jumped back on the boat or plane, according to which mode you use. Just several little quick things I wanted to wrap up is, do note that right where we ended, I just want to rub it in a little closer, that to be a real revolutionist, to do whatever it is that some of you might think you're wanting to do, you got to somehow be able to persuade yourself without using any of the recognized tools and methods, and you've got to be persuading yourself somehow to move, but to move toward goals, move toward areas that have no known significance. You've got to be able to do both of those. You've got to be able, you cannot frighten yourself, which, if I run through these in this way, I'm sure if you listen with ordinary intelligence, if you just refer back to the ordinary intelligence of your nervous system, it says, hey, give me a break, because there is no other possibility. But think about it. There is no way to do anything extraordinary using any of the three recognized methods, which I got to admit, for all secondary purposes, that about covers it, by God. You cannot frighten yourself, but now that's what everybody tries. The first two are the main ones that people think about, let's say. Is fright or the promise of some reward. But to frighten yourself, well, I have got to quit drinking. I'm to the point now that I can't remember anything Monday through Sunday, forget the weekend. Or I should quit smoking. I'm now spitting up a half pint of blood. Or what? I should lose weight. My heart, is pounding, I can't move up the stairs. It's either that, or you say, I think I'll lose weight simply on the basis that since my third wife's left me, I guess I better get back out on the scene, and I don't look as great as I ever did, assuming I ever did, and so a person can say the reward will be I'll lose weight, I'll get some plastic surgery, so that's that reward. And of course, tied into that is what they perceive to be the third one of the peer pressure, which you can always look at as being sort of the background to the first two. But now think about it. Now everybody's tried that. There's no room for any sort of cynical attack on humanity, much less yourself, because left to any device, if you're trying to persuade yourself, if you're trying to undergo any change, if you're trying to undertake any sort of change in yourself, self-improvement, what's possible? What's going to be the basis other than some basis of fear that you're threatening yourself? Like, come on, I've got to lose weight, or I'm going to, according to all the tables, well, except this one, which is a little shake, but all the rest of them say that for every 10 pounds you're overweight, 10 pounds, 10 years off your life, or whatever it is. You're either going to frighten yourself, or else you got a promise to yourself that if I do this, I will live longer. And I'll outlive my uncle that promised to leave me something. I think he's going to leave you in the lurch, but never mind that. Other than that, although the sentence when I started out, I guess, rhetorically made sense for me to say a real revolutionist has got to be able to persuade himself without using any of the recognized methods. What else is there? If it's not through a threat that you're going to be in some way hurt, if you can't persuade yourself to change, or that if you can persuade yourself to change on this, whatever the basis is, that you will benefit from it, what in the hell else is there? Listen, I just asked the questions. I can't tell you everything. Well, I would tell you, but this particular answer is not bar-coded and won't run through the machine here. So, and I don't have the facilities to ring it up manually. Whatever happened to manually? Also, besides that note, would you care to really note that not just individually, but TKS, this kind of stuff, engages in none of the above? And if you have ever thought otherwise, then you were thinking with the wrong part of your brain. This kind of stuff, and all of its intents and purposes and historical invisibility, has never engaged in that kind of stuff. Not because of any great, admirable leanings on its part, because it doesn't lean all that much, but it just does not engage in it. Or, in the alternative, it does not offer any. It doesn't offer threats. It doesn't tell you that, hey, does anybody think they're interested in whatever the hell this is? And somebody says, yes. And you say, good. Well, the rest of you, but anyway, you, sir, it's a good thing you got here in time, because, if this is the kind of stuff you're interested in, you better straighten up, you better do everything we say, you better join up, get your button, get on the program, get on the train, get on the bandwagon. Or else, I mean, you think life's been kind of dicey up until now? Nothing. Boy, now that you've seen it, now that you've got an idea, it'll even be worse. Or, it's a good thing you got here, because if you pursue this kind of activity, I don't know that I have the poetic heart to be able to begin to describe the wonderful rewards. It does not engage in it. Again, for no reason. I'm not saying because in some way it knows better. It doesn't engage in it. Well, I'll tell you the reason. If nobody's listening, it can't. And it can't for a larger reason than you can't individually. That is, try and persuade yourself to do something for any recognized reason, for a threat of some damage to be done if you don't change, or the promise of some reward. In the same way that you cannot be a revolutionist and persuade yourself in any subversive way on that basis individually, then this kind of stuff, if you want to look at it as being sort of institutionalized, it can't engage in it. Not for any reason, it just can't engage in it. Because if it did engage in it, it ain't it. I mean, it's that simple. So you got no promise of reward. You got no threat for future detriments that may fall upon your head and shoulders and mess up your wingtips. And certainly, the third part, there is no peer group pressure to make you do this. I mean, if you walk away from this, you got no peers, you got no group anywhere outside this that's going to go, you mean you quit watching those tapes, or you quit trying to think however it is you've been, wait till I tell the rest of the guys, you'll be an outcast. There is no peer pressure to do this. I think if anyone would like to write that down, that must be one of the safe understatements of what? At least our decade, however we measure it. There is no peer pressure. To wrap up this wrap-up, I was going to point out that a revolutionist's thoughts and actions have got to be more than merely free from that kind of above-mentioned division, such as operating, trying to change, trying to do something new in your thoughts and perhaps your actions on the basis of either reward or a fear. Your thinking and action has got to not only be free from that kind of division, that kind of alternative, that dichotomous alternative, but you've got to actually find a new neural building site, a playing field, in a fresh area where people don't even talk about, where they don't even think about that kind of stuff. Just being free from it won't do anything, because you can't be just free from it. You'd be standing there trying to be on one foot, whereas in the 3D world, because of the nature of it, you cannot stand on one foot, unless, of course, you're standing on one foot. But what you're attempting to do would be to stand nowhere, to stand in the air, to keep every foot off the ground, and you can't do that. So it's not a matter of merely being free in some way from that kind of thought. You simply got to be somewhere else. It's only there that any of, such as this pre-game wrap-up, can make any sense. To be somewhere where you would attempt to persuade yourself to change, not because of any potential reward or not through any threat, which is getting both feet off the ground intellectually in the 3D world. It's impossible. The mind simply says, well, there's no reason to change if it's not one of those two. It's in a new place where the people, speaking metaphorically, of course, where the guys, the neurons at this new place, they don't even think in that way. They don't even talk about it. It just never comes up. So much for the wrap-up. First official paragraph. The civilized, proper, secondary man is one who pretends that that which is irrelevant to him individually is of importance. That is being civilized. We're going to go into super, what do they call it? Warp drive civilized. But just at the ordinary level, amongst two or three other maps I could sketch, but I suggest to you that it is a truly operational definition of the secondary world, of man being this supremely intellectual, singularly intellectual creature on this planet, and the operational definition of being civilized, from one view that I was trying to get you to use tonight, is that the individual, the man, will pretend, with all sorts of quotation marks, of course, around pretend, but will pretend that that which is individually relevant to him is of importance to him. Give you an easy example that wouldn't be so easy in the city because it has no, of course, qualitative judgment, has nothing to do with charity, and etc. But speaking at the primary level of an individual man and what is pertinent to him, to pretend that starvation going on in foreign lands, starvation of his enemies, of some opposing group of people, some opposing religion, just at the secondary level, to hear, to know about starvation over there, which is true at the primary level, is impertinent to the primary world. Primary man, if there was such a thing anymore, it's not right or wrong, but if there were primary people living at that level, which there are, of course, down in the lower part of your nervous system, their only interest in, their only proper interest in, is keeping themselves and their kin alive, keeping their DNA, their genes going. Because if we were back, justice would prevail, if we were back at a point where you were living at the primary level, you would be under conditions where you would be fighting every day just to stay alive. And so there would be nothing improper, but you would not be civilized. It can't be all, you cannot have it 2 and 3 times what it is. Or I think, as you like to say, you can't have it both ways. You can't even have it 3 ways. And so a civilized person, even now, genetically, by and large, just take this as simply as it's put, at that level, the starvation of someone else, a foreign land, in a true sense, if it makes it easier for you to grasp one, your enemies. If we were in a war with Nation X and they were holding hostages and killing our people, and you found out that the war effort was starving their people, and pictures and movies came out, video of little children starving, it would be individually impertinent to you under those conditions, but it's actually impertinent to you in a wider sense if you're not even at war. It's just as long as it's not affecting you at the primary level, in a sense, in a real sense, it is impertinent to you. But what is a civilized man if not this? A civilized man, a whole bunch of these, pretends, not that he does it willfully, but he pretends that that which is individually impertinent, people starving on the other side of the world, that he has no connection with, as far as he's concerned. He has no connection with, he pretends that it is of importance. He will talk about it. He will sign something. He will contribute money. He'll hold some sort of get-together in his house and invite the neighbors there, and he'll show little pictures of that he received from some organization of people starving, and he will pretend That is, he acts as though it is of importance. The super civilized, which I will have to suggest to you, if you're not going to figure it out already, is going to be some form of a revolutionist. But a super civilized person would be one who fully understood just what I'd said, understood that it too was impertinent, and still pretended that all of it was of supreme personal importance to him. At that level, it is no longer just being civilized. It is no longer just being at the somewhat automatic level of serving life's purposes, because you would understand to begin with all the sorts of things that I don't know that would be of any benefit to go into. Not that there's any reason that anybody should find it impertinent or to be of no consequence if people are starving. If you're driven to be concerned about it and there's something you can do, if you just contribute money, do it. We've been all through. You've got to understand that. But insofar as it being pertinent to the person individually, in a quite real sense, genetically, at the very basis of primary life, it is not. It's all kind of relative, but it's not. Not compared to keeping him alive, the person, and his family, his genes directly insofar as he can perceive them, his known kin, his nation, his city, his tribe. But then to understand that fully, you might think, if you were ordinary and you could follow that line of thought without getting choked up, then you might say, well, that would lead to some form of supreme cynicism. Tut tut. Then you have regressed, because then you're less than even secondarily civilized. Notice, because you'd be less than someone pretending that that which is of no individual significance to him is indeed truly of personal, very strongly personal importance. You would be less than that to be cynical in the ordinary sense. So to go beyond that, the truly civilized would be someone who fully understands that we've upped the stakes, but beyond what I just described as being ordinarily civilized, is to understand fully that, so that the being civilized and you understanding the impertinence has even gone up to another level, that the whole idea of being civilized, the whole idea of whether you should help or not help, whether you should help your enemies or not help your enemies, whether you should feed starving children of your enemies since they're helpless, all of those discussions are impertinent to the blank. It would be to understand that and then to continue on another level to pretend that it's all, nothing left out, that it is all your understanding of the impertinence of the secondary level of being civilized, to understand that and then to proceed to pretend that it's all of supreme importance. That is being truly civilized. There is a sidestep to this that perhaps some of you will find more interesting, that has to do directly with the revolutionist, you might say, or humanity's own individual death, because I know all of you find that of more interest. That one aspect of life's hold, one aspect of the way life directs man's march, man's evolution into a secondarily civilized creature, is in keeping him unendingly mortgaged, by keeping him continually buying secondary stuff to the point that he will surely die broke. Should I pause and then let everybody wait for me to say, of course, I mean this, not metaphorically, symbolically. Because in case you never noticed, except for the extreme ends, which are of the lesser importance of the very rich and the very poor, everybody in the middle dies in debt. I should have said instead of broke. Scratch that. Because there is a difference, symbolically. As long you understand the small percentage of those just now speaking about in the material, ordinary external sense, the very rich, we're not going into that tonight, but the ratio, the percentage of the very rich in the world, you can say is of small significance, the numbers of the people. The very poor now are of somewhat lesser importance than they used to be, and the somewhat poor are uncivilized, because if you're so poor, and the really poor, there's a difference between the poor and the rest of you. The poor is they can't get in debt, and that's the definition of the poor. Well, and the real rich can't get in debt. I mean, they can willfully go out and try to engage in a leverage buyout and go borrow more money, but the point is they cannot, if they're really rich, they cannot get in debt. Even if they go out and just on their signature borrow $2 million, the kind of people that can on their signature borrow $2 million, you do understand it got to be worth many, did I say many times more than $2 million. So the really rich cannot go into debt, and the really poor cannot go into debt because no one will give them credit. So those two extremes, in the sense I'm going to try and get you to see something, they do not count. It is the middle of the bell curve, the bourgeoisie, the hoi polloi. John and Jane Doe, anywhere USA, anywhere planet Earth, are those that are at the heart of life's life via man. And one of the ways it civilizes man, one of the ways that the apparent, and I'm not questioning it, but the apparent three-dimensional evolution of humanity is held in check and is regulated, is by keeping everybody except the extremely rich and the extremely poor, which are two aspects of almost being uncivilized. But the rest of it, you stay mortgaged buying secondary stuff to the point that you will die in debt. It is perhaps the greatest accolade in the city that life, if it showed up at your demise and stood there and said a few words, probably the greatest thing that life could say to a secondary civilized person would be, he died in debt. That would be the greatest compliment that life could pay to an ordinary man, that he died in debt, of course, to me. Not the Bloomingdale's, not the General Motors Acceptance Corporation, to me. Because what is it? We surely mean something else by keeping man mortgaged by continually buying secondary stuff. You don't think I'm really talking about buying cars and clothes. Of course you do. That is the material, skeleton, flesh put on this energy transfer, that you do continue to buy secondary stuff, which again you've got to be outside the extremes of being poor when you can't really buy anything. You might be out bartering or growing your own. You certainly cannot go into debt. And the real rich do not count in the area I'm trying to point to. It is the heart. It is the vast majority of humanity, and the vast majority is getting vaster in majority here as the days go by. That the middle class is becoming the class, as it's called. It is to continue to get the ordinary spending their resources as though standing in line to die, which the real rich and the real poor have their own different wiring, that is, their own different perception if they were questioned and thought about it, than you would. But it is the continual expenditure of resources so that you have to apparently keep refueling yourself. Now, it's symbolic, remember, because this is true in life, in case you don't know it. All these ideas, life's still operating. At least any of you think that I keep giving short shift to the idea of Satan and Lucifer. All you got to do is look at advertising. Just a joke. But all the things about the great American dream, and of course by now they're calling it in other parts of the world the great Bulgarian dream, the great Czechoslovakian dream, is what? To own your own house. And I see ads on TV and of all these happy little people smiling with a child in front of their house, and it's from a bank or a mortgage company, talking about the great American dream of owning your own home, which I don't know who you ever thought about, but nobody except the real rich or the real poor. I mean, it's almost nobody owns their own home. They're not saying that. It's to be mortgaged. They don't ever end up owning it. The average person, even in America, all over the world, dies before they ever pay it off. And normally, well, it's very common for the remaining spouse, normally the wife in our society, maybe the mortgage is too big, she may have trouble holding on to it, so it just goes back to the bank, to the mortgage company. It just keeps changing hands. It is the refueling of the secondary world. But just notice again, it's no attack, as you know, on advertising or the banking system. But the idea, and nobody questions it, you don't think you're wired up to think another way, that part of life's body, owning your own home. And it may say something like, thanks to the combined efforts, the enlightened efforts of your local members of the American Banking Association, or wherever it is, the National Association of Home Mortgage Companies, to own your own home. And it's, in a sense, it's a lie. It's to go in debt for this place. And it's no difference from most people in just renting an apartment. The whole idea, well, you got equity. Go out to the graveyard, go into funeral homes and ask a man, do you feel a lot better that you have equity in that place than as you just threw your money down a rat hole, as they like to say, paying rent? And he might go, wait a minute, you tell me there's a difference now that I think about it? Now from this supine position, I can think about it. All right, now symbolically, away from that which is true enough. But life keeps a person spending their intellectual resources. They keep the nervous system feeding itself enough to whatever interests seem to be secondary enough, the kind of hobbies, social position, fashion, everything that seems to keep someone from going insane, that keeps people, in another view, from staying there in the slaughter queue and going, wait a minute, why the hell did I go in debt to buy this house for $40,000? I guess $80,000 I should say nowadays, and I'm going to pay $50,000 worth of interest. Let's see, how old am I? There ain't a chance in the world I'm ever going to pay this thing off. What the hell? I mean, going to own a house. It's the kinds of things, in a sense, that keeps one in line, literally and figuratively. That keeps one from going bonkers. That keeps one from just going, this whole thing's a waste of time. Where's my 38? I'm going to rebalance my nervous system by placing 3 ounces of lead right next to my cerebral cortex. It's all part and parcel of the playing field, of waiting in line. But notice, what I wanted you to see was, and that was more than just a throwaway line when I said, if life stood beside, which it does in a sense, everyone, humanity as it dies and refuels the planet in this part of life's own nervous system, but if it showed up individually, to the average person, not the person at the extremes of the real rich or real poor, the greatest thing that life could think to say if it stood there and looked down at you, using you generically as an average Joe and Joette, and it looked down, forget the number of clubs you belong to and how well you treated your wife or husband. Of course, life wouldn't do this because life would know the rest of you wouldn't understand it. Or withal, it would know not to say it just in case somebody went, wait a minute, what the hell does that mean? So life wouldn't do it, but if it did, when we'd be there, it could say, and I said, come on, tell the truth. What's the greatest thing you could say about that person? Life would say, well, he died in debt. Of course, the tacit part is, like he was supposed to, like I expected, and he did not let me down. Now, not just died in debt that he hadn't paid off his car or his house, he died in debt how? He died in debt that there was an imbalance twixt him and not him in the transfers of energy in life. That's the way it's supposed to be, or else inertia would take over. Entropy would be alive in the sense that the flip-flop, the slinky going down the stairs, energy going from one person to another, you buying something, you wanting something else, somebody wanting something you got. If that did not take place, it would find a level out and it would be flatline. Life would be dead in man. You have got to be in debt. You cannot be up to date. You cannot be current with your bills. Not and be right in the heart, right in the marketplace, right where life, as it probably would want you to think, is most alive. Where's that? Where you're in debt. Oh, okay. That's where the excitement is, isn't it? Think how many people would be bored if it wasn't for the fact that there they sit once a month going, holy moly. You know, I'm either going to be thrown out of my place or lose my car. What's my choice? Oh, I'm sorry. I do have another choice. I can quit eating for a month. Yeah, I got another choice. Now, see, the rich do not have that privilege, the real rich. I mean, they sit around and they worry about, should we name our new child Biff? or Spot? Should I wear my new whites to play tennis this afternoon? Or those off-whites that Uncle Gertrude gave me? And, of course, the real poor do not sit around and discuss this, because the real poor are either on the verge of starving or they're out literally having to find food. So it is only the part that life cherishes so dearly, relatively speaking, the ordinary person, the civilized man. And it keeps him expending the energy. It makes him stay in debt. He stays mortgaged up through here, and we're talking about the limbic and the cortical aspect of the nervous system, not his pocketbook, although, one more time, I assume you see the pocketbook, he does stay that way. It's an absolute intricate tracking parallel and symbolism between the two, because you stay in debt, and if you're the average person, you're going to die in debt. You are. Just the average. You go out in the street now with a pistol and just start shooting at ordinary folks. And I don't know how many people you'd have to kill that they'd check that one of them would die broke even. I'm not talking about a head that you could just go out there and shoot into crowds out of a football game. And I don't know, you'd have to get in, don't go try it, but you'd have to get in, I'm sure, probably into the hundreds of thousands and maybe the millions before that they went and checked. And one guy over here that you shot actually broke even. That is, he died, paid off his debts, and he didn't owe a dime. So, although it's true, then the point I want you to see is always, if you got that kind of subversive insight, if not curiosity, to see that all of this stuff, all right, I'll be technical, all of this stuff is always a perfect, if you got the eye for it, is always a perfect, it's almost the other side of the record, the other side of the coin, tracking a parallel in the symbolic sense of this going on, of people dying in debt. Not broke, not rich. That's way out here. In here, they die in debt. The ordinary person does not die in psychological debt. What is it people you always are hearing? And some of you have already experienced it. It may have been like a pre-echo on a record that may not have happened, but you thought that somebody close to you, your mother or father, was about to die. And I know, and you know, that many people suddenly realize, oh my God, I got to go see her, or I got to go see him, because I cannot, as much as I hadn't talked to her in 14 years, except to trade insults every Christmas, or, I can't let this happen. Or if it has happened, the average person, you got your own nervous system, will walk around the rest of their life wringing their hands. Oh, I got to straighten out things. I can't believe what my mother did to me. Well, won't you talk to her? Oh, she's been dead 20 years. It's that kind of thing. It's not just psychological. It's what I'm telling you. That is part of the purpose of memory also. The recycling of energy. And memory part of it is to stay in debt. Look at your own memory at the ordinary level. What does it do? What, just left to its own devices, which, in case you think ordinary memory, you got a choice. Ha ha! Cough, cough, pause, pause. What does it primarily do? You know the answer. You just don't want to admit it. If I had time to slap everybody around collectively, if not individually, you know what your memory normally does. It's continuing to try and pay off debts. Continually talking about the debts. It stays in debt. If you took debt away from memory at the ordinary operations of the routine person's nervous system, they'd have no memory. You'd have an amnesia that couldn't, there'd be no hope. You couldn't say, well, sometimes this kind of spontaneous amnesia, maybe your memory will come back. If you took away debt from an ordinary man's memory, you can forget spontaneous or forget, well, someday it'll come back inexplicably. It ain't coming back. You have operationally wiped out an ordinary man's memory if you take away the idea of debt, if you unmortgaged his memory. If you got his memory out of debt, what would you remember? Nothing. So it can't come back. It's not that you lost your memory. What would we call it? Yes, they repossessed your memory. I mean, it's not like a dog that your memory wandered off and it may come back. No, it's not coming back. If you got your memory out of hock, then it's not lost. They repossessed it permanently, and it's not coming back. Well, I bet you, let's try this. And I was going to say, I bet nobody can find any connection between this. Because I keep weakening, figuratively. And I'll try to, I'll try to say, look how it's connected. All right, I'll be strong and I won't do it. Complete change of subject. I was going to give you a heretofore unknown, a kind of subversive survey of fantasy fiction that may or may not have ever existed, but never mind that. What else is new? Anyway, it goes like this. It's a kind of historical survey that's never been noted. It's ongoing, and it goes like this. It was approximately, the first time this kind of story arose, it was somewhere around 5700 BC. The first story arose concerning future man. This was in their tales. In other words, what you'd refer to as fiction. Just their normal literature. It wasn't that much of a division back then, but most of you finished the 10th grade, so you know what it is. But it started then, it carried through very clearly through the Greek and Roman era of literature. But the first stage of this sequence that I want you to consider is, and it's ongoing, is I'll make you see, I think, even easier in a second. But it's never been noted in this way. The idea of future man, Superman, but it was a future man figure in their mythology, in their literature. And the characteristic of the future man, this superior person, that they, even then, 57 BC, 5700 BC, they even projected literally in the future. They were doing their own version, I guess, of science fiction, you might call it, or fantasy fiction. The prime characteristic was this, that this figure had human emotions. That was the progress dreamed of from that view. Such things as this figure had compassion, was charitable, was tolerant, had empathy and sympathy for the heartache, the hunger, death and illness of his fellow man. At that time, that was the future of humanity. The dream, as reflected in their literature and myths, was of a true Superman. Something of which, at their time, they were incomplete. It was a nascent movement in the human nervous system that this will be our future. This would indeed be Superman, not just old barbarians like us, just old hairy warthogs that can stand up straight, and we're so rude. It would make a southern comedian probably hide his head. Their dream was, remember, this is just the beginning now. Their dream, literally, their own nervous system. It was not of their own volition. They just made it up. It was the nervous system making pre-echoes. Or those of you getting better is the fact that three-dimensional apparent time does not necessarily run in sequence, and that which may just now be appearing, I assume some of you suspect by now, just because it may just be appearing here doesn't mean it's never appeared anywhere. A word to the... But now notice, the rest of this is ongoing. Now let's bring it up, move the evolution of man right along. And I said I think I can make it simple because even I am aware of this much of contemporary culture. Star Trek. At least the TV parts I've seen. Even though it was in the future, there was a figure in there that was even more futuristic than the Earth people. Dr. Spock. But what was his claim to fame, the way that they presented it? That he was sans human emotions. Maybe we take a pause dramatically. It doesn't cost any extra. Ponder this until I help ponder it for you. What in the world can you make of that? Do you follow it as simple as I put it? That at one time, if we were talking about the kinds of and sorts of people, even though you weren't there, but I assume you imagine that were very common in the year 5700 BC. I mean, there were the sorts of people compared to which probably Attila looked like Miss Manners. So imagine the people in that era. I mean, we're talking about before the Germans showed up, before the Norse came out with their ideas of Odin, and these guides going around being hung up on trees and having to go out and give up one eye themselves to learn it. Just imagine. And that their idea of heaven was a big old cold place that you were waiting to die. So remember, we're talking about three-dimensionally, in a sequential sense, before them. So imagine, here they are, just the nervous system is just activated high enough that they made up tales, that they talked, and they had these tales, and they had people around that says, I've had dreams, the gods talk to me. And they tell these stories, and others enough remembered it, that I know about it. The tales was of their heroes, their Superman, their Dr. Spock of 5700 BC. Their idea, if they were doing a TV script, that kind of Star Trek, would be their own version of Dr. Spock in their midst, more or less. They might have moved the time up a few hundred years or something, but still, more or less contemporaneously with them, would have been this figure from another place. I don't worry about it. I'm not an expert in TV or science fiction. I know that Spock, I think, was just supposed to be from another place instead of another time. But as long as he's that far away, you understand there's no difference. He was from another time, even three-dimensionally speaking. But at any rate, back then, their idea would be their own Dr. Spock would have been what? That's what I'm telling you. And now I answer it for you, of course. But their idea would be a man or a creature with a full complement, the full development of just what we call human emotions, that they did not have at that time. It was the beginnings of it, or they couldn't have dreamed of it. Because if life talked about it in their nervous system, it would have been gibberish. So they had to have some knowledge, but their feeling then, their conception of this future man, the Superman, would be one with a fully executed, developed limbic system and the display, the exercise of all of what we just call human emotions, what everybody does, of charity, more compassion, of a man who did not necessarily turn around his fellow man as they would have and turn around and see you eating something and decide he was hungry and grab it. You know, if you didn't like it and he was big enough, he might kill you. Their Dr. Spock would have been a man far removed from that, a creature far removed from that. He would have had the full complement, the full arsenal of human emotions. And by human emotions, of course, I'm inferring those singular to man, those that are not the negative or the aggressive sensations and passions of the animal, of the red circuit of man. Those things that would be singular, those things that religions talk about, those things that a civilized man's sense of morality talks about. Compassion, charity, attempted love. That was their idea. A future man. Now, it seems simple enough. But now move right along. And of course, it's all been a gradual process, and everything that was has not necessarily disappeared. It is still extant somewhere in somebody. But at any rate, out at the institutional, at the external, observable, literary, historical level, you move right along. And it went from that, which surely seems clear enough when I describe it that way, that their dream, a future man, a few years up the road, would be a man fully developed and at least partially governed by human emotions. Not just these dark, dank, aggressive, dangerous animal passions. So you move right along, and what are we up to now, though? What can you make of it? That now the dream, and Spock, and of course he's just one of all kinds of stories. They're hundreds of years back in Western literature and Eastern literature. He's just sort of an I guess, a contemporaneous archetype, because this has been going on now for many, 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 many decades, into the hundreds of years, that now the dream has become of the future man. It would now be our forward-looking, our hope for offspring, coming generations. But if he was here now, what is it that Spock exemplified perfectly? Well, they said it all the time on the show, or the few times I saw it enough to see what it was. And I know they made, or I'm sure they did some jokes and etc., but he was still considered in some way superior. I saw it enough that they would turn to him for real insider. When the pressure got on, what should we do? Because ask him, because he was freed from human emotion. Yeah. And then some of the characters, I'm sure, looked like, whew, God, what a guy. Boy, if I could be like that. What has happened? What is life up to? Can we have it both ways? And it's not just Star Trek, as you should know. It's in your own nervous system. If I'd started another way and asked for a show of hands of how many people would surely think that whatever this kind of activity is up to, or if in some way you had greater insight about what life was about, if you were more intelligent, if you were more conscious, any sort of description, if I get everybody to agree, all right, I know what you mean. That's all right. Would one characteristic surely be that you would be less emotional? My suggestion is to you that somewhere between 100 and 100% of people would go, yeah, I can buy into that, surely. In fact, if I had my choice, I wish I was at least somewhat less emotional. What's going on? Because people will immediately agree that, yes, that would be an improvement. Me and everybody else. Just look at the world situation. Look at the way we treat one another. Look at the wars, the rumors of wars, the threats. It's human emotion. Oh, we got to get past that. What has happened? We're only talking about 5,000 or 6,000 years. And as I said, it's gradual, and it's not all gone. The past is not gone. I don't want to tell you where it is and scare some of you, but it's not complete. It's all right, it's out of town. If that, just let you off the hook. It's out of town. But how has it gone in that relatively short period of time, even though it may be out of town, sort of, that it's gone from progress, which was correct, that progress, future man, Superman, would be one with a full complement, arsenal, storehouse, operational functions of human emotions into same dream, but now it would be apparently just the opposite. Does that make any of you really want to ask yourself, since I've done it for you rhetorically at least twice, what do you make of that? Or put another way, TWE. To what possible ends, all right, TWPE, to what ends might life be up to that it seems to go just almost in an opposite direction, and yet both of them seem correct? Of course, I guess a real good city nervous system can say, well, they both seem correct for their time. Tut tut. How can it be? What could possibly be the purpose in this? Or if you want to really get dangerous, what's coming next? Yeah. Except the ordinary level. I mean, right now you got your plate full, as the philosophers say in the South. You got your plate full just to think, well, why is it that progress was coming from being crude, feral, uncivilized, and that progress was getting to be a person with fully developed city, secondary, civilized human emotions, and just barely got there, and it's like, you finally got to town, and the car won't stop, and now you're going out the other side in the other direction, back out of the town, and now progress is supposed to be some sort of sign beyond human emotion, or without human emotion. Let me say that before I say beyond. Is that we got to get rid of human emotion. That's the problem. Whereas at one time, that was the solution. I'm awfully tempted, if it wasn't for the time, not to just make any other mention of it. It's not a play on words. It's not some sort of trick. It is what has happened and is still happening. And it's certainly not based upon anything I say. You should be able to feel it. You should be able to feel when I said that a vote would be somewhere hovering at a minimal amount, percentage of 100. If you ask people in general, would progress, do you believe that assuming man does not kill himself with detergents and drinking light beer, that if man does not kill himself and he continues to progress, will the man of tomorrow, will future generations be less driven, held, guided by human emotions? The middle part of life's body would rise up. They wouldn't get that excited. They'd go, well, sure. Never really thought about it, but sure, that's got to be. But how can it be that also that the progress of man was, we have got to have human emotions? We have got, that will be progress. And that was your forefathers. That is down in your own nervous system. That is back at the red circuit level within everybody. How can it be both? And why does it now seem so proper? Why does it feel just uncontestable at the ordinary level to say, yes, I believe that the future of man lies, or that future man himself would be one, so to speak, no longer held. All right, freed from human emotion. How is that progress? How can it go like that, if that indeed is what it's doing? Well, I could put it sort of simply and say that which seemed to be the progress, let us say again, at 5700 BC, of man developing in his nervous system human emotions was seen at that time as a kind of civilized saving grace. And whereas now it's turned into something else. Would you care to consider this then? There is no such thing as a strictly defensive weapon. Or for those of you on the other side of the room, there is no such thing as a strictly offensive weapon. No such thing as a strictly defensive weapon. And everybody can hear with one ear, they can hear it one at a time. Anything that can be two can be otherwise. I had the timidity, I think, although I didn't intend it, but I ran out of deodorant earlier this month, that I mentioned that ultimately all thoughts are fungible. But if you get real good, you can see that all movement in the city is interchangeable. There is no such thing as a purely defensive weapon. If they passed a law that no one can own a handgun except those who want it for defensive purposes, and you've got to swear, you've got to sign an affidavit, you've got to be you got to swear that that's all you're going to use it for. Well, you do see the folly in that. There's no such thing as a strictly defensive weapon. Because if it can be a defensive weapon, it can be an offensive weapon. There is no such thing as a defensive thought. There is no such thing as a defensive emotion. That, well, if I had just the emotions to where I didn't let my lower, baser instincts come out, if I just had the kinds of defensive emotions such as charity, if I had that, then I'd be all right. But if you buy a gun to defend yourself, it's just one short step. If you live long enough, somebody would need to be defending from you. Any thought that you have, any energy that the nervous system passes from point A to point B will eventually go from point B to point A, from three-dimensional observation. The very things that would seem to be the saving grace, the very thing that seemed to be at the time, which it was, not that it needed my acquisition, my agreement, but that seemed to be progress, the development of human emotions, is now what? It's people looking at Dr. Spock and thinking, gee, what a guy. Might I conclude by asking a rhetorical question, a subversive rhetorical question, I guess, that what might life be insouciantly hinting by all of this that a subversive ear might catch. That progress is the development of human emotions. Now you see it, now you don't. Now it is, now it's not. That it's not freedom from human emotion that's being sounded out in life's nervous system that's coming out now verbally in the ideas such as we have got to be free of human emotions to progress. May I suggest to you that my use of insouciantly, kind of casually, or if you had a better sense of humor, that life will cavalierly do things like this, knowing that unless you come over here and join me, then not enough people's ever going to notice it to make a damn bit of difference, and so it just does it. But I was going to suggest it's not a matter, as they dream of the Spocks and the other tales, of being free from human emotion. It's to be somewhere else along the line that which at one time was a useful defensive weapon, then an offensive weapon, or vice versa, is not to be freed from it. It's simply to be beyond it. Which, if I haven't in the last few months or years given any hint as to what this kind of stuff might be up to, might I suggest